Jackie. I am the support team manager.
And I am Emily, the support team supervisor. So we'll jump right into our presentation. So first we'll discuss what is an IRA beneficiary. So a self-directed IRA beneficiary is an individual or an entity that the owner of the IRA account can name or has named to receive the cash and assets held within that account upon their passing. As an IRA owner, it's super crucial for you to name a beneficiary for your self-directed IRA to ensure that your assets are passed on specifically as you wish.
So most retirement accounts do have a built-in default beneficiary, which is according to the plan agreement. So at Madison Trust, our default beneficiary is the following line of succession. So we have the spouse, living issue, which would include children, or lastly, an IRA owner's estate. And then some more on living issue.
Yes, and living issue can encompass your children, any grandchildren that survive you. Really, it is any direct descendant of the IRA account holder. Okay, and then wonderful to this wonderful graphic that we have here, which gives you some examples of who you can name as your IRA beneficiary. It's not limited to these options, but this just gives you a couple of examples. So in regards to designating a beneficiary, it does give the account holder more freedom to choose an important individual in their life, for example, a child, a nephew, a niece, or maybe even a sibling. Additionally, as you'll notice in one of the bubbles, you can also designate an entity as a beneficiary. What that means is that you can designate either an organization or a charity that's special to you, or you can designate your formal estate. Additionally, you can designate a trust that maybe you and your estate planning professional have created together.
So with designating beneficiaries, there are typically a lot of options. So it doesn't have to be all to one person or to one entity. They usually allow you to split interests. So for example, an IRA owner may choose to designate their two children, and they may divide those portions 50-50. So each child would receive 50% of the ownership. Another example would be if a IRA account owner had three children, they may choose to split the interest between all three children. So an important factor to remember is that 100% ownership must be divided. So with that being said, if there are three, it is important to account for that extra percent, that 0.01%. So with three children, an account owner may designate 33.33, 33.33, and then 33.34 for, say, the three children they chose to designate. So also with splitting interest, there are primary beneficiaries and contingent beneficiaries. So a primary beneficiary would be first in line. So with the example of two children, say the primary beneficiaries are the two children. The IRA owner may choose to designate contingent beneficiaries in the case that the children or any primary beneficiaries are unwilling or unable to inherit. Setting up the contingent beneficiaries really make sure that you're planning ahead and that your assets do go to, the individuals that you desire them to.
So you could be asking yourself at this point, why is it important to designate a beneficiary? I mean, Jackie just explained to you that Madison Trust Company does have a built-in default beneficiary according to our custodial agreement. However, there are several reasons why it's super important for you to name your beneficiaries, or in our terms, designate a beneficiary. The first one being is that it gives the account holder peace of mind. So naming a self-directed IRA beneficiary ensures that your assets are passed on as you wish. It eliminates any confusion. It can eliminate any tension or family disagreements because your desires and plans are clearly laid out. It will help you continue your legacy. So all that hard work that you put into the workforce before retiring can benefit your loved ones and relieve some of the financial stress that typically comes along with when someone passes away. Additionally, but definitely not lastly, is receiving tax advantages. So it's important because leaving funds in a regular bank account or underneath your mattress may have higher tax consequences than leaving these funds or assets in a tax sheltered account.
Okay, so what is an inherited IRA? An inherited IRA is a type of individual retirement account that is created when someone inherits the assets from the IRA of someone who has passed on. Essentially, it's the way retirement assets are passed on to their beneficiaries. So, for example, if the IRA owner held a traditional IRA and you are named the beneficiary, that would mean that the account could be transferred into a inherited traditional account, and it would then be in the beneficiary's name. So note that traditional IRA account has now become an inherited traditional. So some important things to consider. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have good record keeping. So especially in a self-directed IRA where you have these alternative assets, they could be a little more complex. And it's really important that there's at least some documentation to keep record of what you've been doing, the bills that you've been paying. Have you been paying them on time? What is the schedule for payments? Because when the beneficiary, it is typically a surprise for them to inherit the account. A lot of times they don't have all the information they need, or at least, that advantage of having all the information up front to then feel ready to really dive into taking over the account and continuing on the legacy. So it is really important to document the assets and leave that to your beneficiary. Also, something to keep in mind is to tell your beneficiaries that you have designated them and give them awareness of said account. Like, I have a self-directed IRA account and it's with Madison Trust Company, and I just want to let you know that you are my beneficiary. Just that simple piece of information could be really beneficial to them so that they are prepared when the time comes. And then another important thing to discuss is the payout options. So to consider is that there's a lot of information on payout options and a lot of information to learn really for this beneficiary. So inherited IRAs do have different distribution options than that typical traditional or Roth IRA, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
So perfect. So when opening up an inherited IRA, it is crucial for beneficiaries to understand the options that they have in terms of distributions. So they do differ a little bit from the original IRA account holders' requirements, whether it was a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. So they will have to make an election for how they proceed with their own individual distribution options. That is the best case scenario, because if you decide to name multiple beneficiaries, you can always, each beneficiary will get the opportunity to decide what option is financially beneficial to them specifically. So on this slide, you'll just see a few of the common options that some of our beneficiaries have chosen, depending on the type of beneficiary that they are. You'll notice on the first column that it mentions surviving spouses. They do have the most flexibility in terms of beneficiary distribution options. They can designate themselves as the account owner, or as we like to call it, treat it as my own. They can distribute and roll over the assets or funds into their own new or existing IRA or qualified retirement plan. They can treat it as an inherited IRA and take life expectancy payments, which, for the audience, if you're not familiar with life expectancy payments, it's just another fancy phrase for required minimum distributions. And lastly, as you'll notice in each of the columns, there is always the option to take a lump sum distribution, meaning that you inherit the account into the beneficiary's name and immediately distribute all cash or assets in the account. For non-spousal beneficiaries, their options have been limited, especially after COVID and the Secure Act. So keep in mind there may have been different options depending on when your beneficiary passed away. If they passed away before January 1st, 2020, or if they passed away after. These are specifically the after 2020 rules. So the first most common beneficiary option for non-spousal beneficiaries is transfer the assets into their own inherited IRA account or take a lump sum distribution. Additionally, as we mentioned, that you can name an entity as your beneficiary. We have non-person beneficiaries, which can include certain trusts, your estate, or a special nonprofit organization that you have designated as your beneficiary. So we call the person who is managing this entity account a responsible party. So that's why you'll notice here it says some of the options include entity's responsible party is obligated to make distributions to the beneficiaries. So what that means is that we issue out any distributions to the entity specifically, and then it is the responsibility of that account manager to distribute it out according to your wishes or according to the entity's agreement. And another option is the entity's responsible party can distribute all assets and take a lump sum distribution. And then I just did want to mention that before any beneficiary should make a selection of what payout option they are choosing, they should really speak with a licensed tax professional or maybe their financial planner, maybe your financial planner or your estate planning professional, because Madison Trust is a passive custodian, so we're unable to give you any advice in regards to tax, legal, or financial circumstances. We can definitely educate you on these different options and what the possibilities are. However, we won't be able to tell you that that is the right option for you.
Definitely. I wanted to just mention a real example of an inherited account. So with self-directed IRAs, you're typically holding alternative assets. So just throwing out some random examples, a common investment is in real estate. So say the original account owner had a traditional IRA with a piece of real estate in it. So that real estate is titled to Madison Trust Company FBO, this original account owner. And they say they also have $10,000 of IRA cash in this account. Upon inheritance, there's certain requirements we go through to process the client's account moving over into an inherited account. But just to give you an idea of what that looks like, so cash is simple. So the $10,000 would be moved over to the now inherited IRA account of the beneficiary. But what happens with a piece of real estate? So that is, it's not so complex, but it's different. So the piece of IRA, the piece of property in the IRA would then be retitled to be in the name of this beneficiary. So the ownership is changing. So like cash, it is going from one party to the other. Same with the piece of real estate that we are going to move it over into the name of the now beneficiary's account. And again, it would be, for example, an inherited traditional IRA account holding this piece of real estate and holding, say, the $10,000 of IRA cash.
And just to elaborate more on Jackie's point, most of our assets, when they are held in your custodial account, obviously do not have the individual's name on, let's say, a deed, for example, with real estate. They do have your Madison Trust Company IRA titling, so it does include your account number typically and your name, while with when it's moving over to an inherited IRA, it will switch over to your inherited IRA's titling. So it will have your beneficiary's name on there, and it will also typically say that this is an inherited either traditional IRA or Roth IRA.
Okay. So how do I designate beneficiaries for my Madison Trust IRA? So when it comes to designating beneficiaries, we typically do ask for this immediately. So upon that account sign up, we do ask our clients to provide us with a designation. But it really is accessible to you at any time, as and it could be as simple as logging onto your client portal. So the simplest and it's secure and convenient way to update your beneficiaries would be to go ahead and log into your client portal. It lets you update it in real time, so that's very convenient, and there's security steps with your client portal, so no notary is required. There is an exception there, but I'll elaborate in a bit. And so if the client portal at this time or at that moment isn't an option, we do have another route you can take. So the PDF is available on our website. So at madisontrust.com under forms, you can go ahead and find that beneficiary designation form. So that form will always require the notary for security purposes. But when going back to the client portal version, so the notary is only for certain circumstances. So we'll talk a little bit about community property laws. So if you are living in or plan to live in a community property state, it is something to consider that the spouse may have rights to your accounts and assets. So what it is really is, if you are not going to designate the spouse and you may end up living in a community property state in the later years of your life, you may want to consider how that law would affect you and your beneficiaries. So the community property states are Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. So if you are not naming a spouse and you plan to live in a community property state, you can get that spousal signature to sign off that they agree that they would like to waive their right to that automatic, let's say, rights or inheritance of your account, and then you can designate others. So for example, if it was children and you want to waive the spouse's rights to the account, you would obtain their signature, and then we would need a notary for that.